risk. Let me put a number to each one, and then I'll come back and explain what the number is. For climate, 4.5 per second. Okay? Climate, 4.5 per second. Denial, 700 billion per year. And risk, 2008. So let me start with climate. What is 4.5 per second? 4.5 per second is the number of Hiroshima-strength nuclear detonations that would have to go off in the ocean to match the warming that climate change is forcing in our oceans. 4.5 Hiroshimas per second. That's a lot of warming in our oceans. We're cold outside here, but the Willow 300 dog sled race is canceled today in Alaska because of rain and mud, and it's not cold enough to work dogs. So global weirding is on us. The polar cap, the polar vortex has slid down into the northern Midwest. I'm not going to say a whole lot more about what's going on, because if you didn't get how serious this was, you probably wouldn't be here. But enough to say we need a solution, and fast. And I have seen no study of any kind or any credibility that protects us at 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade that does not require Congress to act. It is not optional. We can't sit around in Congress and wait for the private sector to solve this, or the insurance industry to solve this, or mayors to solve this. There is no success vector that does not run through Congress. So how do we win in Congress? That takes me to the denial machine. That's what's keeping us from winning in Congress. What is $700 billion per year? $700 billion per year is what the International Monetary Fund, they are not stupid people, they're not environmentalists or fossil fuel people. They try to get it right, they're very well educated. It's what they say is the annual effective subsidy for fossil fuel just in the United States of America. So if you're the fossil fuel industry, you are protecting a $700 billion per year subsidy. If you want to go back to some of the carbon prices and social cost of carbon that have been offered, the Obama social cost of carbon runs to about $300 billion per year in effective subsidy to this industry. So when you are the political winner of a multi-hundred billion dollar annual subsidy, what might you be willing to do to protect it? Anything. How much might you be willing to spend? Anything. And they have done so. As Robert Brule, who I want to welcome to Brown University, and Justin Farrell, who's here visiting from my alma mater, Yale, and others have pointed out, there are probably about 100 academics, scientists, who study the climate denial apparatus, the science denial apparatus. We all need to do a better job of amplifying their work. It gets buried in the Journal of Applied Memory and Cognition and whatever. We need to get that work out. It is being done, and I'm very proud that Brown has highlighted by bringing Robert Brule here and to push what they are saying, because it is really important. What this industry did is it took over the tobacco industry's health denial operation and put it on steroids, filled it with money, expanded it into new groups, and it now runs basically a very well-disguised and very widespread science denial operation. Beside that science denial operation, which provides kind of some cred for the other side, they have a political operation. And the political operation is very, very tough. In my world, we had bipartisan work going on climate change. When I got to the Senate in 2007, we had more in 2008, we had more in 2009, we had 5 different bipartisan climate bills in the Senate in that period. It came to a dead stop in January of 2010. Since then, not one Republican in the Senate has gotten onto one serious bill to do anything about carbon dioxide emissions. What happened in January of 2010 to cause that shift from normal bipartisan behavior to this peculiar environment we're in right now? Citizens United. The United States Supreme Court, 5 Republican judges decided Citizens United, and it told giant special interests you can spend as much money as you want in politics. There is no limit. Well, back to $700 billion, right? There is no limit to what they're willing to spend, and they have poured it on. What the court was stupid enough to miss is that if you're going to let big special interests spend unlimited amounts of money, you have also empowered them to threaten to spend unlimited amounts of money. And even if you could chase the unlimited amounts of money through the dark money channels that have been cooked up to hide the hand of the fossil fuel industry, really hard to spotlight those threats. Those are private. And that combination has shut down bipartisanship in the Senate and in Congress. That needs to be broken. It can be broken. We have to point out that this is a party that has been captured by the fossil fuel industry. The narrative on climate has to go from being polar bears versus your job to a detective story of how a big special interest is conning you and has taken control of your government away from you through dark money. That's the Koch brothers, that's groups like Donors Trust, which have no purpose in life, manufacture no product. Their entire function is to launder the identity of donors so that money can go to climate denial operations without having the fingerprints of the Kochs or Exxon or somebody else on it. This whole apparatus that Bob and this brave group of scientists study is very, very effective, and we need to undo it. It has made the Republican Party the political wing of the fossil fuel industry. And that needs to change, and we're in a position to change it. Now, the Senate is Thermopylae, right? Except you got to reverse the good guys and the bad guys. You remember Thermopylae, where 400 Spartans held off the massive Persian army because there was a narrow pass they had to get through? Mitch McConnell and his Republicans are the small band that is holding the Senate. And until we can break that, you could have the public pressure for this go from 53 to 63 to just 73%, which it is. We could have it go to 83, and they would still hold Thermopylae. So we've got to break them. And the way you break them, in my view, is to go after the fossil fuel guys and point out how wickedly they're behaving. Don't let them get away with it. When these CEOs say they know their product is doing harm, they support a solution, and they think a carbon price would make a good solution. No, no, no. That memo does not get beyond the C-suite. Their entire lobbying and electioneering apparatus is still 100% dedicated to preventing the thing they claim to support from happening. So you can break through by going after them and shaming them. We also have to wake up corporate America, the good guys. Because there are lots of American corporations which have an enormous amount of power and clout in Washington, which are doing good things on climate, in their fence lines, out their supply chains. Nobody except maybe Patagonia, little Patagonia, the clothing company, an outdoor company, nobody puts the slightest bit of effort into getting something done in Congress from corporate America. And if you throw in their trade associations, or the Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers, which they support, they are actually powerfully against their own stated policies on climate when it comes to Thermopylae, where it matters. So we have to make sure that corporate America is held to account for having their lobbying and electioneering misaligned with their actual principles. That ought to be an easy ask, right? So how do you break through? And this takes us to the third piece, the last piece, risk. We can obviously tolerate a lot of risk to commonses. Let the tragedy roll on these commonses. We are very bad, particularly in Congress, at holding off risk to common sense. But when you've got risk to interests, whoop, suddenly people start to pop up. And we heard this morning about the prospect of coastal property value crash. That is serious enough that Moody's, the municipal bond evaluator, is actually now evaluating coastal municipal bonds based on flooding risk. First Street has just gone all up and down the Atlantic coast and started around the Gulf Coast doing this study that shows that coastal property values are starting to peel off from inland property values starting to fall, as suggested. Freddie Mac has warned of a coastal property value crash that could drive coastal property owners back from the coast in droves. And they have compared it, here's where 2008 comes in as my number on risk. They have compared the risk, the economic risk of that coastal property values crash to the harm of the 2008 mortgage meltdown on an equivalent scale. Now, they're not the only ones. Mortgage companies and insurance companies are starting to look at it, but it's not vital for them yet because the horizon seems to be about 30 years plus out in a 30-year mortgage. You're paid back, you're done, no big deal. But it's starting to creep in, and it's starting to affect values, and those who are involved in those related businesses are starting to pay attention. The other one was the one that the second panel talked about, which is the carbon bubble. The carbon bubble began with very, very good economic papers by very, very good economists that are very well documented, peer-reviewed, and stand up under all kinds of scrutiny. Investors began to look at that and worry and say, whoops, we have a little bit of a problem. And now you have investor groups representing trillions and trillions of dollars in investment trying to figure out how to protect themselves from the carbon bubble. The Bank of England is probably leading this. The Bank of England isn't just the bank. It's the financial regulator for the United Kingdom, insurance and banking both. And the Bank of England is very animated on this subject. They call the carbon bubble a systemic risk. Systemic risk are the two most boring words in the English language that convey the most terrifying message. Because systemic risk means when those companies crash, it's not just their stockholders that get hit. It's such a big crash. In the same way that the mortgage companies weren't the only ones that went down in 2008, it becomes a global economic collapse. So that has a lot of folks' attention as well. And that too is said to be as bad as the 2008 mortgage meltdown. And by the way, nothing says they can't both happen, which is 2008 mortgage meltdown 2x asterisk, not sure, could be a lot worse. So that is starting to bring people forward in a way that could make a difference. I'll close with two observations. One is that you saw this begin to play out with a big investment company called BlackRock. BlackRock has trillions of dollars under management. Exxon had fought off every shareholder climate action that had ever been brought, over and over, dozens and dozens of times. It fought its shareholders off and was able to avoid accountability. BlackRock, Church of England, CalPERS, some of the big investors said, not anymore, you don't. You've got to do a climate report. They broke their back. They won the shareholder resolution. Success, right? Except, in my view, Exxon wrote a bogus report back. And nobody's really taken on the next step of, wait a minute, why are you assuming that renewables development is going to slow down as renewables move into more competitive pricing against you? How does that make sense? Why are you assuming the lowest adoption of electronic vehicles of any assumption that is out there by a lot? Why are you assuming that there'll be no electric buses or trucks when there are already electric buses and trucks? And if, as you say, carbon capture is this massively exploding industry that's just going to burst into our economy and create enormous wealth and solve this problem for us, why aren't the people down the hall in your investment offices paying any attention to this advice of yours? So, again, we move forward. They got the report. Exxon, I think, fudged the report, and we got to keep the battle on. The last thing is that there's a loose variable out there, and that's the lawsuits. And the lawsuits could make a really, really big difference. This began decades ago with tobacco and the fossil fuel industry moving in and taking over the tobacco denial apparatus. Well, one interesting thing about the tobacco denial apparatus, the tobacco denial apparatus was sued by the Department of Justice of the United States of America and was determined in court to be fraudulent in what it was communicating to the public about its product. And that was upheld by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals and let stand by the United States Supreme Court. You can take the complaint of the Department of Justice in that case, you can take out the word tobacco, put in the word fossil fuel, take out the word health, put in the word climate. You got a lawsuit. And there are lots of lawsuits out there now. And the tobacco people broke not so much when we won those lawsuits. They broke when discovery allowed litigants into their files. And all of those tobacco executives with their hands up with oaths were proven to be liars because we knew from their internal memos that they knew they were lying. So Exxon has just lost in the Supreme Court trying to prevent our sister state of Massachusetts from being able to commence discovery in the Massachusetts case. And they're fighting all these other cases with really preposterous arguments that signal very much that they're desperate not to provide discovery. They literally argued to the Massachusetts judge that they did not do business in the state of Massachusetts consistent with the minimum contacts required under the U.S. Constitution to be sued. This to a judge who had probably driven by an Exxon gas station on her way to work that morning. So don't underestimate the extent to which litigation and the courts are going to be incredibly helpful in breaking the back of this and forcing the denial operation to change its tune and decide to come to the table instead of denying. So we can do this. We now have a House that will send a bill over to the Senate. We now just have to figure out how to get the corporate citizens of this country who are good on this subject to bring that goodness to Congress, not just give us a pass or not let their front groups be against their position, and then just continue to shame the fossil fuel industry for what it's doing and let the American public know this is not polar bears versus your job. This is you being the chump and the sucker in one of the biggest scams that has ever taken place on the planet. Thanks very much.